The Spanish soldiers dug until their hands bled. They had been marching for 11 days, fighting rearguard actions for 3, and now their commander was asking them to become laborers. The soil of Apulia was not kind, dense with clay, tangled with the roots of old vines. But they kept digging. Gonzalo Fernandez de Cordoba walked among them, saying little. He was 49 years old, short, unassuming, with a face weathered by decades of Iberian sun and Moorish wars. He did not look like a legend. He looked like a tired man with calloused hands and mud on his boots. But every soldier in that vineyard would have followed him into the mouth of hell. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us at Narrate Hist Arena. They called him El Gran Capitan, the Great Captain. He had earned that name in the brutal campaigns against Granada, in the sieges and ambushes that had driven the last Moorish kingdom from Spanish soil. He had learned war not from books, but from blood. And he had learned something that the proudest commanders in Europe had not yet grasped. For nearly a decade, the great powers of Europe had turned Italy into a slaughterhouse. The prize was Naples, the wealthy kingdom that controlled southern Italy and dominated Mediterranean trade routes. Whoever held Naples held the key to Sicilian grain, to African gold, to the shipping lanes that connected east and west. France wanted it. Spain wanted it. Both were willing to bleed Italy white to claim it. King Louis XII of France believed Naples was his by inheritance. His armies had swept down through the Alpine passes, seized Milan, and installed French governors in Neapolitan cities. He commanded the finest heavy cavalry in Christendom, the legendary gendarmes, armored knights who had shattered every army they had faced. King Ferdinand II of Aragon, the cunning monarch who had united Spain through marriage and conquest, refused to yield. Naples sat too close to Spanish Sicily. If France controlled both Milan and Naples, Spain would be encircled, strangled, shut out of the Italian peninsula entirely. Ferdinand sent gold. He sent ships. He sent soldiers. And most critically, he sent Cordoba. The French army was led by Louis d'Armagnac, Duke of Nemours. He was everything Cordoba was not: tall, handsome, aristocratic. He came from one of France's oldest noble families. He had been raised on tales of Charlemagne and Roland, taught that courage and noble blood could overcome any obstacle. He believed in the old certainties, that heavy cavalry decided wars, that a true knight led from the front, that valor was the supreme military virtue. Nemours commanded 12,000 men, 3,000 heavy cavalry in full plate armor, 4,000 Swiss mercenary pikemen, the most feared infantry in Europe, and 5,000 mixed foot soldiers and light cavalry. He also had artillery, a dozen siege guns that could reduce the Spanish earthworks to rubble. He looked at Cordoba's ragged 6,000 and saw only victims. But Cordoba had spent 3 years learning the weaknesses of the French war machine. He had studied their charges, their formations, their reliance on shock and awe, and he had devised a counter. The arquebus was a crude weapon by later standards, an iron tube mounted on a wooden stock, fired by touching a burning slow match to a pan of priming powder. It was inaccurate beyond 60 paces. It took nearly a minute to reload. In damp weather, half the weapons might misfire, but its lead ball could punch through plate armor at close range. It could kill a knight. It could kill a warhorse. And in sufficient numbers, fired from behind fortifications, it could break any cavalry charge ever conceived. Cordoba had 1,300 arquebusiers, the largest concentration of firearms ever assembled on a European battlefield. He had trained them to fight behind earthworks, to reload in coordinated volleys, to work in concert with pikemen who could protect them from any cavalry that survived the initial fire. He was inventing combined arms warfare. And tonight, in this unremarkable vineyard outside Cerignola, he would prove it worked. By dawn, the Spanish line was ready. They had transformed the terrain. Natural ditches had been deepened to 5 feet. Low ramparts of piled earth provided cover for the arquebusiers. Wooden stakes angled outward to gut any horse that tried to leap the barriers. The vineyard's stone walls anchored the flanks. Cordoba positioned his arquebusiers in the center, exactly where the French cavalry would naturally strike. Pike squares protected the flanks, and behind the gentle rise that marked the rear of his position, he kept his secret weapon, 600 Spanish heavy cavalry under Prospero Colonna, hidden and fresh, waiting for the moment to strike. The great captain understood something fundamental about human psychology. The French would see his men cowering behind dirt and assume they were cowards. They would see the trenches and think weakness. They would charge with absolute confidence, and they would ride directly into a killing field. The Duke of Nemours brought his army forward in perfect order. It was a magnificent sight. The military might of France assembled and deadly. The gendarmes formed the front ranks, their lances raised, their horses stamping with anticipation. Behind them, the Swiss pikemen stood in their traditional deep columns, a forest of 18-foot ash shafts. Nemours surveyed the Spanish position through his spyglass. He saw exhausted men, mud, desperation. He smiled. "We will finish this in one charge," he told his officers. "By noon, we will dine in Cerignola." The artillery duel began at 7:30 a.m. French guns hurled iron balls into the Spanish line, throwing up fountains of dirt and stone. The Spanish answered with their own pieces, smaller, fewer, but accurate. For 30 minutes, the two armies traded fire. A French cannonball, or perhaps a stray spark from a careless match, found its mark. One of the Spanish powder wagons exploded with apocalyptic force. The blast killed dozens instantly. Debris rained across the Spanish center. Men screamed. Horses bolted. For a terrible moment, the entire line seemed to waver. From the French position, a cheer erupted. God had spoken. The Spanish were destroying themselves. Nemours saw his moment. He lowered his visor. He raised his lance. Charge! A French gendarme in full plate armor weighed approximately 250 pounds. His warhorse, bred for size and aggression, weighed 1,400 pounds. At full gallop, roughly 25 miles per hour, the combined kinetic energy was devastating. A single knight could shatter an infantry formation through sheer momentum. Multiply that by 3,000 and you have the most terrifying weapon in medieval warfare. The charge covered the ground with horrifying speed. 200 yards. 100. 50. The ditch caught them perfectly. The front rank of the French charge collapsed into chaos, horses screaming, knights stumbling, the geometric precision of the formation fracturing in an instant. Men cursed and spurred their mounts, trying to force through the obstacles. Some tried to leap the vineyard walls and impaled their horses on the stakes. They were 10 yards from the Spanish line. They could see the smoke rising from the arquebusiers' matches. "Fire," Cordoba said quietly. 1,300 arquebus balls slammed into the stalled cavalry at point-blank range. The effect was butchery. Plate armor designed to deflect lance strikes crumpled like parchment. Knights were punched backward out of their saddles, dead before they hit the ground. Horses collapsed, thrashing, crushing their riders beneath them. The front ranks of the French charge simply ceased to exist. But the genius of Cordoba's system was not the first volley. It was what came next. His arquebusiers had been trained in the countermarch, a continuous rotation of fire and reload that produced an unending stream of lead. 20 seconds. The first rank dropped back, frantically reloading. The second rank stepped forward, raised their weapons, fired. Another volley, another wave of death. The smoke hung thick and sulphurous, blinding the attackers. The French knights could not see what was killing them. They only knew that the world had become fire and iron and screaming. The Duke of Nemours had survived the initial volleys. His horse had been killed beneath him, but he had risen, sword in hand, rallying his men. He was brave beyond question, doing exactly what a French duke was supposed to do. "Forward," he screamed. "For France, for honor." He did not see the Spanish soldier who leveled an arquebus at his chest. The man was nobody, a conscript from Castile, 23 years old, whose name history would never record. He pulled the trigger. The Duke of Nemours fell face forward into the mud, a hole the size of a fist in his breastplate. He was dead before his officers could reach him. Word of Nemours' death had not yet spread, but the surviving French officers ordered the Swiss forward. The mercenary pikemen advanced in their traditional deep columns, 4,000 men shoulder to shoulder, their weapons angled forward like the spines of some enormous beast. They did not break. They did not waver. They marched through the carnage of the failed cavalry charge with mechanical precision. The arquebusiers fired into them. Men fell. The Swiss closed ranks and kept coming. They reached the Spanish line and collided with Cordoba's pike squares. What followed was 40 minutes of grinding, suffocating horror. Pike combat was not elegant. It was a shoving match where men in the front ranks died in seconds, replaced by those behind. The sound was terrible. The scrape of steel on steel, the wet thunk of weapons punching through flesh, the screams of the wounded trapped beneath the feet of the living. But Cordoba's arquebusiers, positioned on the flanks, continued to pour fire into the sides of the Swiss columns. They were killing men who could not defend themselves, could not even see where the shots were coming from. The Swiss had expected the Spanish to break. Every other army had broken under their pressure, but these Spaniards had followed El Gran Capitan through 3 years of impossible victories. They trusted him. They believed in him. They did not break. At 9:15 a.m., the Swiss began to retreat. Cordoba had been waiting for this moment. He signaled to Prospero Colonna. The Spanish heavy cavalry, hidden behind the rise, untouched by the battle, charged into the retreating French and Swiss flank. The impact was devastating. The retreat became a rout. Men threw down their weapons and ran. By mid-morning, the French army had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Over 4,000 lay dead on the field, including the Duke of Nemours and dozens of French nobles. The Swiss mercenaries had been mauled, their reputation for invincibility permanently damaged. Spanish losses, fewer than 500. Cordoba ordered the Duke's body recovered and treated with honor. A brave man deserved that much, even in death. But standing over his fallen enemy, the great captain did not feel triumph. He felt the cold certainty of a man who had glimpsed the future. The age of the mounted knight, the armored nobleman who decided battles through personal valor, was over. The future belonged to gunpowder, to entrenchments, to the cold mathematics of combined arms warfare. Within months, every army in Europe would begin training arquebusiers. Within decades, the tactics Cordoba pioneered at Cerignola would become standard doctrine. The sulfur smoke that hung over that vineyard would never truly clear. Spain would hold Naples for 200 years. The balance of power in the Mediterranean had shifted permanently. Ferdinand of Aragon, when he received news of the victory, reportedly said, "Cordoba has given me Italy." But the true legacy of Cerignola was not territorial. It was doctrinal. A man with a week of training and a 10-pound iron tube could now kill the finest knight in Europe. Courage was no longer enough. Nobility was no longer enough. The old certainties, the ones Nemours had died believing, were ashes.